The world had not so much ended as it had violently rearranged itself. One moment Ilara was humming along to the crackling radio, dusting the worn spines of her beloved books, the scent of lemon polish and old paper a comforting balm. The next, a guttural roar, a monstrous shriek of tearing metal and shattering glass had ripped through the quiet afternoon. The house, her sanctuary, her history, her everything, had imploded. She remembered the sensation of being lifted, tossed like a rag doll, and then the crushing weight. A darkness, absolute and suffocating, descended. The air, thick with dust and the acrid tang of pulverized concrete, burned her throat. Panic, a cold, sharp thing, clawed at her. She tried to move, to push, but her limbs were pinned, heavy and unresponsive. Every breath was a struggle, a rasping, desperate inhalation of grit. Time became a fluid, agonizing concept. Minutes stretched into eons, marked only by the relentless thrumming in her ears, the ache in her bones, and the growing desperation in her chest. She called out, her voice a weak croak, lost in the echoing silence. "Leo! Leo, are you there?" No answer. Only the phantom sensation of movement, the unsettling creak of settling debris, and the ever-present, suffocating darkness. Her mind, a frantic bird trapped in a cage of shattered stone, flitted from one terror to another. Was she alone? Was anyone else alive? Was this it? The end, not with a whimper, but a terrifying, cataclysmic bang. Then, a sound, faint, distant, but undeniably there. A series of sharp, insistent squawks. "Leo," she whispered, her voice barely audible. The squawks grew louder, more frantic. It was Leo, her African gray parrot, her garrulous, opinionated companion of 15 years. He was usually a creature of habit, content to preen himself on his perch, offer his unsolicited commentary on her life, or mimic the telephone with unnerving accuracy. But this was different. This was raw, unadulterated panic. "Leo boy, where are you?" she managed, her voice cracking. And then, a sound that pierced the gloom and ignited a flicker of hope in her bruised and battered soul. A clear, distinct call, mimicking her own voice perfectly. "Ilara!" Tears, hot and stinging, welled in her eyes, blurring the already indistinct shapes of the rubble. "Leo! Oh, Leo, you're there! You're alive!" The squawks intensified, interspersed with more urgent calls of her name. "Ilara! Ilara! Come on, Ilara!" His voice, usually so full of playful mischief, was now laced with a terror that mirrored her own. But it was also a tether, a lifeline. It meant she wasn't truly alone. It meant there was something, someone, out there, even if it was just a feathered friend trapped in the chaos. She tried to shift again, to push against the unyielding weight. A sharp, searing pain shot through her leg, and a strangled cry escaped her lips. "Leo, I can't move!" The parrot's calls became a frantic, desperate chorus. "Ilara! Ilara! Help! Help! Ilara!" She could feel the vibrations through the debris, the shifting of earth, the groaning of tortured structures. The earthquake, the cataclysm that had brought her world down around her, had been a brutal, indiscriminate force. She'd been in her study, a small room at the back of the house, a place she always felt safe, surrounded by the familiar comfort of her books. The wall behind her desk, the one that backed onto the garden, had given way first, bringing with it a cascade of plaster, wood, and the very earth from her flower beds. Then the roof had collapsed, a thunderous symphony of destruction, burying her beneath a tomb of her own making. She focused on Leo's voice. It was her anchor, her reason to keep fighting, to keep breathing. "I'm here, Leo," she whispered, her voice raspy. "I'm here. Just keep talking." His calls continued, a constant, reassuring, heartbreaking sound. "Ilara! Ilara! Where are you? Ilara!" He was calling to her, searching for her, Even in this unimaginable darkness, it was a primal instinct, a bond forged over years of shared silences and endless conversations. The dust made her eyes water, her throat ache. She closed them, trying to conserve what little energy she had. She imagined Leo, his bright, intelligent eyes wide with fear, perched on a precariously balanced piece of wood, his voice echoing through the ruins. He was her constant, her confidant, the one creature who truly understood her, even if it was through mimicry and learned phrases. He'd been a gift from her late husband, a promise of continued companionship, and now, in this desolate landscape, he was her only hope. She felt a tremor, a subtle shift beneath her. The debris groaned again. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Was this another aftershock? Or was it something else? The hope that had flickered to life began to dim, replaced by a gnawing dread. She was trapped, buried, and the only sound that offered solace was the frantic cry of her parrot, calling her name into the void. "Ilara!" Leo shrieked, his voice cutting through the oppressive silence with renewed urgency. "Ilara, come on!" It was a plea, a demand, a desperate attempt to stir her from the encroaching despair. And it worked. For a moment, just a fleeting moment, the sheer determination in that bird's voice ignited a spark of defiance within her. She wouldn't give up. Not as long as Leo was there, calling her name. Not as long as there was a chance, however slim, of rescue. She focused on his voice, letting it wash over her, a beacon in the suffocating darkness. She needed to survive for him. He needed her. And she, in turn, needed him. His voice was the only proof that her world, however fractured, still existed. Leo's panicked squawks were a frantic, feathered heartbeat against the crushing silence. Each sharp, insistent call was a tiny hammer, chipping away at the immense weight that pressed down on me. "Ilara! Ilara! Come on, Ilara!" His voice, usually a garrulous chatterbox, was stripped bare, raw with a terror that mirrored my own. It was a sound so utterly unlike his usual mimicry of my tea-making ritual or his exasperated pronouncements on the weather that for a moment I almost didn't recognize it. But then, the inflection, the desperate plea, the sheer me-ness of it pierced through the suffocating darkness. "Leo," I rasped, the word a dry, scraping sound in my throat, tasting of pulverized concrete and despair. "I'm here, boy. I'm here." My voice was a phantom, thin and weak, barely a whisper against the groaning symphony of the collapsed house. My leg. The searing pain was a constant, throbbing reminder that I couldn't simply wriggle free. It was pinned, trapped beneath a colossal slab of what felt like my old oak desk, now a monstrous, unyielding tombstone. "Ilara! Ilara!" Leo's cries intensified, a desperate, repetitive mantra. He was somewhere above me, I knew. His cage, usually perched on the windowsill of my study, must have been tossed, broken, but somehow he'd survived. A part of me, the part that had always doted on him, was flooded with a fierce, protective surge. He was my responsibility, my feathered anchor, my gift from a life that felt 1,000 years ago, a life with Michael. Michael, who had adored Leo's uncanny ability to hold conversations, who would have been beside himself with worry. The thought of him, a sharp, sudden ache, was quickly pushed aside. Grief was a luxury I couldn't afford right now. Survival was the only currency. "I can't move, Leo," I managed, the words punctuated by a ragged breath. "My leg, it's stuck." His response was a series of agitated squawks, a sound of pure, unadulterated fear. Then a new sound, a faint, rhythmic thudding, growing louder. My heart leaped into my throat. Was it another tremor? The house settling, threatening to bury me deeper? Or was it something else? "Leo," I whispered, straining my ears. "What is that?" He didn't answer, his cries still a frantic symphony of distress. The thudding grew closer, accompanied by muffled voices. Human voices. They were distant, muted by layers of stone and plaster, but they were undeniably there. Hope, a fragile, tentative thing, began to unfurl within me, a tiny, pale bloom pushing through the cracked earth of my despair. "Hello?" I tried to shout, but it came out as a choked croak. I tried again, summoning every ounce of strength, every last ember of defiance. "Hello? I'm here. Help!" The thudding stopped. The muffled voices became clearer, a man's voice, deep and urgent. "Hear that? I think I heard something." Another voice, higher pitched, more anxious. "Where? I don't hear anything." "Over there," the first voice said, closer now. Sounded like a woman? Leo's squawks reached a fever pitch, a desperate, percussive accompaniment to the human voices. He was amplifying my cries, a feathered alarm bell in the heart of the devastation. "Leo, be quiet, boy," I hissed, though I knew he couldn't understand. His panic was a testament to the horror he'd witnessed, and his continued cries were my only hope of being found. "There!" the first voice exclaimed, much closer now. Definitely a voice. And is that a bird? A beam of light, impossibly bright, sliced through the suffocating darkness. It was a narrow, wavering shaft, dancing across the jagged edges of the debris, illuminating dust motes swirling like tiny, frantic spirits. It swept across my face, blinding me for a second, and then settled. "Oh my God," a woman's voice breathed, laced with shock and relief. "She's alive." The beam of light was followed by the glint of metal. A helmet, a face, streaked with dirt and sweat, peered down at me. Kind eyes, etched with exhaustion, met mine. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" "Yes," I managed, tears welling and blurring the light. "Yes, I can hear you." "We're from the rescue team," he said, his voice calm and steady, a comforting balm against the raw terror that had been my constant companion. "We're going to get you out of here." The sounds of activity surged around me, more voices, the clink of tools, the scrape of metal against stone. They were working, methodically, carefully. I could hear Leo, still squawking intermittently, his voice a frantic, reassuring presence nearby. "We have a parrot," one of the rescuers called out, his voice tinged with surprise. "He's been going crazy." "That's Leo," I choked out, a watery laugh escaping my lips. He kept calling my name." A ripple of murmurs went through the team. The man whose face I could now see clearly, he looked like a seasoned firefighter, his uniform stained with grime, offered me a small, reassuring smile. "He's a good bird then," kept us on track. The work was slow, agonizingly so. Every shift of debris sent a fresh wave of pain through my leg. They were trying to free it, carefully, meticulously, talking me through every step. "We need to move this piece here, ma'am. It's putting pressure on your leg." "It's okay," I whispered, my gaze fixed on the small patch of sky I could see through a jagged opening above. "Just be careful." The air, thick with dust, still burned my throat with every rasping breath. The darkness had been absolute. But now, with the light and the sound of rescue, it was beginning to recede, replaced by a different kind of fear. The fear of the unknown. The fear of what lay beyond this suffocating tomb. But it was a fear tempered by the overwhelming relief of not being alone. "What happened?" the lead rescuer asked, his voice gentle. "Do you remember what happened?" I closed my eyes, the images flashing behind my eyelids. The sudden, violent lurch. The guttural roar of the earth tearing itself apart. The sickening crunch of my study, my sanctuary, imploding around me. The wall behind my desk, the one lined with my beloved worn spines of books, had been the first to give way. Then the roof. I remembered the sensation of being lifted, tossed like a rag doll, and then the crushing weight, the finality of it. "The house," I whispered. It just fell. "We know," he said softly. "It was bad. A lot of the neighborhood's gone." A wave of cold washed over me. Not just my house. The entire neighborhood. The world. "Leo," I said, my voice regaining a sliver of its usual strength. "He's a gift from my late husband. He's all I have left." The rescuer's gaze softened. "We'll make sure he's okay, ma'am. We've got him. He's a noisy little guy, but he's safe." A distant, muffled squawk confirmed his words. Leo was safe. The thought was a profound comfort, a vital piece of my fractured world salvaged from the wreckage. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, a different kind of sensation, a release. The immense weight on my leg lessened. I cried out, a mixture of pain and pure, unadulterated relief. "We've got it," the rescuer announced, his voice filled with a quiet triumph. "We've got your leg free." Gentle hands reached for me. They were strong, sure, and impossibly careful as they maneuvered me onto a stretcher. As they lifted me, the world tilted and swam. I saw the ceiling of my study, or what was left of it, a jagged, splintered maw, revealing a bruised, angry sky. Dust rained down, but it was different now. It was the dust of liberation, not suffocation. They carried me out, through a chaotic landscape of rubble and twisted metal. The air outside was cool, carrying the faint scent of rain and something metallic, something acrid. I saw other rescuers, other victims, their faces etched with shock and disbelief. And then I saw him. Leo. He was perched on the shoulder of a young woman in a paramedic's uniform, his gray feathers ruffled, his bright eyes wide and still scanning the unfamiliar surroundings. As soon as he saw me, he let out a single, clear, "Ilara!" I reached out a trembling hand, and he hopped onto my finger, nuzzling his head against my cheek. His presence, his familiar weight, his soft feathers, was more comforting than any words could ever be. "You saved me, Leo," I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. "You really saved me." He responded with a series of contented chirps, a soft cooing that spoke volumes. The world outside was a terrifying, broken place. But as I held my feathered companion close, I knew that somehow, together, we would find a way to navigate it. His voice, my voice, had been the tether that pulled me back from the brink. And now, with the light of day blinding my eyes and the steady beat of rescue around me, it was the sound of his simple, devoted presence that promised a future, however uncertain. The world outside the suffocating embrace of the rubble was a canvas of chaos, a brutal masterpiece painted in shades of dust and despair. I was a fragile brushstroke, still clinging to the canvas, my existence defined by the sharp, unyielding edges of broken concrete and twisted rebar. Leo, my feathered anchor, was pressed against my chest, his tiny claws a comforting pressure on my torn shirt. His frantic chirps had subsided into a soft, rhythmic cooing, a sound that vibrated through me like a fragile pulse. The rescuers, their faces etched with a grim determination that warred with the relief of finding me alive, had worked with a focused intensity. Their voices, once a distant murmur, now surrounded me, a symphony of calm authority amidst the wreckage. "Easy now, ma'am. We've got you." "Just a little further." "Almost there." Each word was a gentle prod, coaxing me from the suffocating darkness that had been my world for what felt like an eternity. They had managed to free my leg, a process that had been a brutal ballet of pain and controlled force. I remembered the sickening crunch, the searing agony that had threatened to steal my consciousness. But Leo's insistent calls had been a potent anesthetic, a constant reminder that I was not alone. Now, as they carefully maneuvered me onto a stretcher, his small body trembled against mine, a tiny earthquake of shared trauma. The air, once thick with the acrid tang of pulverized concrete, and something metallic and alien, now carried the faint, yet unmistakable scent of damp earth and something vaguely floral. It was a stark contrast to the suffocating dust that had been my constant companion. As they lifted me, the world tilted and swam. The oppressive weight that had pinned me down was replaced by a different kind of pressure, the firm, steady grip of human hands. Then, the light. It wasn't the gentle, diffused glow of my study, but a harsh, unfiltered assault on eyes that had become accustomed to an absolute darkness. I blinked, squinting against the sudden brilliance, and the world resolved itself into a tableau of devastation. My street, once a familiar, comforting stretch of suburban normalcy, was unrecognizable. Houses were not just damaged, they were obliterated. Streets were choked with debris, and the sky, a vast, indifferent blue, seemed to mock the ruin below. A wave of nausea washed over me, not from the physical exertion, but from the sheer, overwhelming scale of the destruction. This wasn't just my house. It was an entire community ripped apart. The familiar rhythm of my life, the quiet hum of the neighborhood, the distant laughter of children, had been silenced, replaced by a guttural roar of a different kind of devastation. Where am I? I managed to croak, my voice a raw whisper. A woman in a khaki uniform, her face smudged with dirt but her eyes kind, knelt beside me. "You're in what used to be Maple Street, ma'am. We're taking you to the triage center." She spoke with a practiced calm, her words a balm on my fractured nerves. "Your Parrot is safe. He's with you." I tightened my grip on Leo, burying my face in his soft gray feathers. He nudged my cheek with his beak, a familiar gesture that sent a fresh wave of emotion through me. He was here. He was alive. In the face of such widespread ruin, his survival felt like a miracle, a testament to the resilience of even the smallest of lives. The journey to the triage center was a blur of movement and hushed voices. I saw more devastation, more shattered lives. Ambulances, their sirens a mournful wail, weaved through the debris-strewn streets. People, their faces a mixture of shock and disbelief, wandered aimlessly, their eyes scanning the wreckage for familiar landmarks, for any sign of what had been. At the triage center, the organized chaos was a stark contrast to the silent horror of the rubble. Tents had been erected, forming a makeshift medical facility. Doctors and nurses, their movements swift and efficient, tended to the injured. The air buzzed with a low thrum of activity, a counterpoint to the distant sounds of rescue efforts still underway. They checked my vitals, cleaned and bandaged my wounds. The pain was a dull throb now, a constant reminder of my ordeal. But it was manageable. My focus was on Leo, who perched on my shoulder, his bright, intelligent eyes taking in the strange, new world. He occasionally let out a soft, questioning "Elara?" that sent a pang through my heart. He was still processing, still trying to make sense of the sudden shift from the quiet sanctuary of my study to this bustling, disorienting scene. As they prepared to move me to a more stable medical facility, a man in a uniform approached. He was grim-faced, his eyes carrying the weight of the disaster. "Ma'am," he began, his voice low, "we've been surveying the area. It's bad. The entire block, most of the neighborhood, it's gone. We're still trying to get a handle on the full extent of it." I nodded, my gaze sweeping across the panorama of destruction. There were no familiar rooftops, no recognizable landmarks. My home, my books, my life's quiet tapestry had been reduced to dust and memory. A profound sadness settled over me, a heavy cloak of loss. But beneath it, a flicker of something else persisted. Gratitude. Gratitude for the hands that had pulled me from the darkness, for the voices that had guided them, and most of all, for the desperate, persistent squawk of a small, gray parrot. They placed me in the back of an ambulance, the sterile environment a welcome change from the grit and grime of the rubble. Leo hopped onto the seat beside me, his usual garrulous nature subdued. He seemed to sense the gravity of the situation, his small form radiating a quiet anxiety. As the ambulance pulled away, I looked back at the flattened landscape. It was a scar on the earth, a testament to a force I couldn't comprehend. The cause of the cataclysm remained a chilling mystery, a question mark hanging heavy in the air. But as I clutched Leo closer, his steady breathing a small comfort against my side, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. We had survived. We had faced the abyss, and we had, against all odds, found our way back. The journey to the hospital was long, the landscape outside a monotonous stretch of damaged infrastructure and bewildered crowds. The world had been violently rearranged, and I was a survivor of its brutal redesign. In the quiet hum of the ambulance, I found myself replaying those agonizing hours in the darkness. The crushing weight, the rasping breaths, the gnawing fear. And then, Leo's voice. His frantic, insistent calls, a desperate beacon in the suffocating blackness. He had been more than a pet. He had been my sanity, my tether to the world of the living. His mimicry, usually a source of amusement and occasional exasperation, had become my lifeline. He had screamed my name when I could no longer find my own voice. He had been the insistent pulse of life, when mine had dwindled to a fragile thread. At the hospital, the sterile white walls and hushed corridors were a stark contrast to the raw, visceral reality of the disaster zone. They admitted me, running a battery of tests, tending to my physical injuries. Leo, thankfully, was allowed to stay with me, a small concession that meant the world. He sat on a specially provided perch in my room, his eyes following my every movement, his presence a constant, silent reassurance. Days blurred into a routine of recovery. The physical pain slowly receded, replaced by a persistent ache, both in my body and in my soul. The images of the devastation replayed in my mind, the screams of the injured, the haunting silence of what had been. But through it all, Leo was a constant. He would preen his feathers, nibble on the seeds they provided, and occasionally, softly, call out, "Ilara?" Each time a shiver would run down my spine. It was a reminder of the darkness, yes, but more importantly, a reminder of the light that had pierced through it. He had been my guardian angel, my feathered sentinel, his unwavering focus on me, a testament to the bond we shared. One afternoon, a doctor came to review my progress. He was a kind man, his eyes holding a weariness that spoke of the immense burden he and his colleagues were carrying. "You're healing remarkably well, Ms. Hayes," he said, his voice gentle. "Your leg is mending, and you seem to be recovering from the trauma. We've also managed to get some more information about the event." He hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "It was a seismic event, unlike anything we've seen in this region. Catastrophic. The scale of the destruction is immense. Rescue efforts are ongoing, but it's a long road ahead for everyone." I listened, my gaze fixed on Leo, who was quietly observing the conversation. The word catastrophic hung in the air, a cold, hard truth. Yet in the sterile quiet of the hospital room, with Leo's soft chirps a gentle counterpoint to the doctor's somber words, I felt a strange sense of peace. "What about my neighborhood?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Is there anything left?" The doctor's expression softened with sympathy. "The area where your home was located sustained severe damage. Most structures are completely gone. We're still assessing the full impact, but it's unlikely there's much standing." My heart sank, but not with despair. It was a quiet acceptance, a surrender to the inevitable. My home was gone, my books, my sanctuary, reduced to dust. But I was alive, and Leo was alive. That, in itself, felt like an immeasurable victory. As the doctor left, I reached out and gently stroked Leo's head. He leaned into my touch, a contented rumble emanating from his chest. "You saved me, you know," I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. "You kept me going." He cocked his head, his dark eyes shining. "Ilara," he said, his voice a perfect imitation of my own, tinged with a newfound softness. A tear traced a path down my cheek. It wasn't a tear of sorrow, but of profound gratitude. We had been trapped together in the jaws of destruction, and together, we had emerged. The world outside was irrevocably changed, and so was I. But in the quiet confines of this hospital room, with my feathered companion by my side, I knew that our bond, forged in the crucible of disaster and amplified by his desperate cries, was now an unbreakable force. We had faced the silence of death and found our voice, and that voice, in the form of a parrot's persistent calls, had led us back to life. The future was an unknown landscape, scarred and uncertain, but we would face it as we had faced the rubble, together. The light, when it finally pierced the suffocating darkness, was not a gentle dawn, but a brutal probing beam. It sliced through the thick haze of dust and pulverized concrete, a tangible intrusion into the tomb I had inhabited. Before the light, there had been the voices. Muffled at first, like whispers from another dimension, then growing, coalescing into a symphony of urgent shouts. "Over here, I hear something. Careful with that beam, Dave. Don't want to drop it on us. Is that a parrot?" The question hung in the air, a bizarre punctuation mark to my ordeal. I wanted to cry out, to scream that it was me. Not just the bird, but my throat was a raw, burning cavern. Every attempt to inhale sent shards of pain through my chest, and the effort of even a faint groan felt monumental. My limbs were still pinned, heavy and unresponsive, as if they belonged to someone else, someone already claimed by the earth. Then, a different voice, clearer, closer, cut through the din. "Leo? Leo, are you there, boy?" My heart, a frantic drum against my battered ribs, leaped. It was him, a rescuer, calling for my feathered companion. But it was also a sign. They were here. They had found us. "Leo! Ilara! Ilara!" The parrot's voice, usually so full of mimicry and commentary, was raw, a desperate, guttural cry. It was the sound of pure, unadulterated panic, a sound I hadn't heard from him even during the most violent thunderstorms. And then, mixed with his desperate calls, another sound, closer still. "Ilara! Can you hear me? Ilara!" This voice was a man's, deep and steady, laced with an urgency that mirrored Leo's own. It was a beacon in the crushing blackness, a lifeline thrown into the abyss. I hear you," I rasped, the sound barely a breath. It felt like tearing silk, a collective intake of breath from the rescuers. "She's alive! She's here!" The beam of light swung towards me, bathing my trapped form in its harsh glare. It was blinding, but I welcomed it. It was proof that the world hadn't entirely dissolved into chaos, that there were still people, still structures, still a chance. "Don't move, ma'am," the steady voice instructed, now accompanied by the metallic scrape of tools against stone. "We're going to get you out. Just stay calm. Your bird is right here with you, making a racket." Leo. He was still close. I could hear his frantic rustling, his continued insistent calls. He was a small, feathered anchor in the vast sea of destruction. "Leo, my boy," I whispered, my voice a fragile thread. "You did it. You saved me." The work was slow, agonizingly so. Each movement of the rescuers, each scrape and grind of metal against concrete, sent tremors through the debris. My body screamed in protest. The crushed leg, the searing pain in my side, the ache that had settled deep in my bones. It all flared with renewed intensity. But with every sound of progress, a sliver of hope widened within me. They were chipping away at my prison, stone by painstaking stone. I focused on Leo's voice, on the steady stream of instructions from the rescuers. I tried to block out the groaning of tortured structures settling around us, the unsettling creak of debris that still threatened to shift. Time became a fluid, agonizing concept again. But this time, it was a river flowing towards rescue, not an endless, stagnant pool of despair. "Almost there, ma'am," the man's voice said, closer now. I could feel a change in the pressure around me, a slight easing. "We're clearing your legs. Can you feel that?" I could. A dull throbbing where there had been crushing weight. "Yes," I managed. "I can feel it." The beam of light danced around my face, and I blinked, eyes unused to such intensity. I saw the outline of a helmet, a concerned face streaked with grime, a hand reaching out. "Easy now. We're going to lift you." The sensation was terrifying and exhilarating. A team of them worked in unison, their movements coordinated and efficient. I felt myself being gently, carefully maneuvered. The crushing weight began to recede, replaced by a blinding, piercing pain as circulation returned to my limbs. I cried out, a raw, involuntary sound that was quickly followed by another, more encouraging voice. "She's out! She's clear!" Then, the world tilted. I was being lifted, not tossed like a rag doll this time, but cradled, supported. The air, though still thick with dust, felt impossibly fresh, impossibly vast. I squinted against the daylight, a pale, bruised sun struggling to assert itself through a sky choked with debris. And then I saw him. Leo. He was perched on the shoulder of one of the rescuers, a small gray miracle against the backdrop of devastation. His head was cocked, his bright, intelligent eyes scanning the scene. And then they found me. "Ilara," he squawked, a sound of pure relief that echoed my own. He wriggled free from the rescuer's shoulder and, with a clumsy, fluttering flight, landed on my chest. His tiny claws dug into the thin fabric of my shirt, and he pressed his head against my cheek, chirping softly. It was a comfort beyond words, a feathered balm on my bruised and battered soul. "Leo," I whispered, tears finally streaming down my dusty cheeks. "My good boy, you were so brave." The rescuer who had been closest to me knelt beside me. He was young, his face etched with exhaustion, but alight with a quiet triumph. "We heard him, ma'am. Kept calling your name. We wouldn't have known where to look otherwise. He guided us right to you." He looked at Leo, then back at me, a faint smile touching his lips. "Smart bird, that one." He's everything," I managed, my voice still weak. They carefully placed me on a stretcher, the cold, sharp thing of the ground replaced by a soft, yielding surface. Leo remained perched on me, a constant, warm weight. As they began to carry me away, I looked back at the gaping maw of what had been my home. It was a jagged wound in the earth, a testament to the violence that had ripped through our lives. Pulverized concrete, twisted rebar, shattered remnants of a life I had known. It was all there, a jumbled, heartbreaking testament to loss. But as they carried me towards the cacophony of what must have been a makeshift triage center, towards the hum of generators and the distant wail of sirens, I held Leo close. His familiar scent, a mixture of bird seed and something uniquely Leo, was a comforting balm. His soft chirps against my skin were a testament to resilience, to the enduring power of connection. We had been trapped in the darkness, two souls clinging to the sliver of hope that was a parrot's voice. And now, in the stark, unforgiving light of day, we were free. The world was broken, shattered beyond recognition, but we were alive. And that, for now, was enough. The walk, or rather the carried journey, felt like an eternity. The terrain was treacherous, a landscape of jagged ruins and choked streets. Every few yards I saw glimpses of the widespread devastation. Houses reduced to rubble, cars overturned and mangled, the familiar landmarks of my neighborhood erased. A thick, acrid tang of smoke and something metallic hung heavy in the air. The sky, a bruised canvas of gray and brown, offered no comfort. Where are we going? I croaked, my voice barely audible above the rhythmic crunch of boots and the low murmur of the rescue team. To the staging area, ma'am, the young rescuer replied, his voice calm and reassuring. We've got doctors and nurses there. They'll check you over. We're trying to get people to safety. Organize aid. Safety? The word felt alien, a distant echo from a world that no longer existed. He hesitated for a fraction of a second. We're doing our best, ma'am. It's bad out there. Worse than you can imagine. I didn't need him to tell me. The panorama of destruction unfolding before me was a silent, devastating testament to his words. Yet, even amidst the ruins, there were pockets of frantic activity. People, dazed and disheveled, moved with a strange, somnambulant purpose. Others sat on the curb, staring blankly at the wreckage of their lives. The air thrummed with a raw, primal fear, a collective shock that had settled over everything like a shroud. As we neared the staging area, the noise intensified, the clang of metal, the shouts of people, the low, continuous hum of activity. A makeshift tent city had sprung up, a stark contrast to the surrounding desolation. Figures in white coats moved with hurried efficiency, tending to the injured. They gently lowered my stretcher, and a woman in scrubs immediately knelt beside me. Her face was kind, her eyes sharp and assessing. "Ilara, is it? I'm Dr. Ramirez. Can you tell me your name?" "Ilara Vance," I whispered, my voice gaining a little strength. "And your parrot?" she asked, her gaze flicking to Leo, who was still nestled against my chest, preening his feathers with a surprising calm. "Leo," I said, stroking his head. "He's been with me." "Remarkable," Dr. Ramirez murmured, a hint of wonder in her voice. "He seems to have weathered this better than most." She began a quick, efficient examination, her fingers probing gently, her eyes scanning for any obvious signs of trauma I might have missed. She checked my pulse, my breathing, the color of my skin. Leo, sensing the attention, let out a soft, questioning chirp. "He's a hero, isn't he?" Dr. Ramirez said, looking at Leo. "He kept you going." "He did," I confirmed, a wave of gratitude washing over me. "He kept calling my name." The pain was a dull, persistent ache now, a constant reminder of what I had endured. But it was manageable. The immediate, crushing terror had receded, replaced by a profound exhaustion and a gnawing sense of disbelief. It was hard to reconcile the image of my cozy study, filled with the scent of old paper and lemon polish, with the apocalyptic scene unfolding around me. As Dr. Ramirez worked, I saw other figures being brought in, their faces etched with pain and shock. The sheer scale of the disaster was beginning to dawn on me. This wasn't just my house. This was everything. "We need to get you on some fluids and get some x-rays," Dr. Ramirez said, her voice firm but gentle. "We'll need to see what the full extent of the damage is. Your leg looks bad, Ilara." I nodded, too weary to protest. My leg was a dead weight, a throbbing agony that had been masked by the adrenaline and the sheer will to survive. "And the bird?" someone asked from behind her. "He stays with her," Dr. Ramirez stated without hesitation. "He's her emotional support." and it seems, her guardian angel. They carefully transferred me to a gurney, and Leo, with a sigh of contentment, resettled himself on my chest. The world blurred as they wheeled me towards a larger tent, the sounds of the triage area fading slightly. I closed my eyes for a moment, the image of my study, my books, my life, flashing behind my eyelids. It felt like a dream, a memory from another lifetime. But Leo's steady weight against my chest, his soft, rhythmic breathing, was real. His presence was a tangible link to the life I had lost, and a flickering ember of hope for the life I might yet reclaim. The journey out of the darkness had been arduous, terrifying, and agonizing. But it was over. And with Leo by my side, I felt a fragile, nascent strength begin to bloom within me, a quiet defiance against the ruins that surrounded us. The world had been violently rearranged, but I was still here, and so was he. The world outside the triage tent was a symphony of groans and distant shouts, a mournful echo of the symphony of destruction that had birthed this temporary haven. I lay on a cot, the thin blanket doing little to ward off the chill that had seeped into my bones, a chill far deeper than mere temperature. It was the cold of shock, of having danced with oblivion and been granted a reprieve. Beside me, in a hastily fashioned perch secured to the cot's frame, sat Leo. His feathers, usually a vibrant slate gray, seemed muted, dusted with the same fine grit that clung to my skin, to my very soul. He was quiet now. The frantic, heart-rending shrieks that had been my sole soundtrack for days had subsided into a low, rhythmic murmur, a soft puffing of air that was almost a contented sound if one didn't know the terror that had birthed it. He'd peck at my fingers when they were within reach, a gentle, familiar gesture that was a comforting balm against the raw ache of my existence. His presence was a physical anchor, a tangible proof that the nightmare hadn't consumed everything. A woman with kind eyes and a stethoscope slung around her neck knelt beside me. Her movements were efficient, her voice low and steady. "Ilara, can you hear me? I'm Dr. Ramirez. We're going to check your leg again." I nodded, the simple act sending a jolt of pain through my body. My leg. It was a throbbing, relentless agony, a constant reminder of the crushing weight that had held me captive. The rescuers had been a blur of urgent hands and hushed voices, a stark contrast to the suffocating stillness of my tomb. They'd worked with a brutal gentleness, their tools biting into the concrete and twisted metal that had imprisoned me. I remembered the sensation of release, of air, sweet, clean air, though still tinged with the acrid tang of dust, filling my lungs, and then the dizzying darkness as consciousness threatened to slip away again. "It's good that you're here, Ilara," Dr. Ramirez continued, her fingers probing gently around the bandages. "You're a very lucky woman, and your Parrot, he's quite a character." A ghost of a smile touched my lips. Leo, my feathered guardian. He'd been a fixture in my life long before the world decided to violently rearrange itself. A creature of habit, Leo demanded his morning seed, his afternoon conversation, and his evening preening. He'd learned my name, of course, and my husband's, and the names of various television personalities he'd overheard. But in those agonizing hours, his vocabulary had narrowed to a single, desperate plea. "Ilara, Ilara." It was a sound that had cut through the ringing in my ears, through the dull roar of my own pain, a beacon in the suffocating black. He kept calling for me. I managed, my voice raspy, a stranger's sound. He wouldn't stop. Dr. Ramirez nodded, her expression a mixture of professional concern and genuine awe. "We heard him. Clear as a bell, even from a distance. It helped us pinpoint your location. Without him, well, it might have taken us much longer." She paused, her gaze sweeping over the tent, the hushed activity, the weary faces of other survivors. A lot of people didn't make it. This was something else. I knew. The rumbling had been unlike anything I'd ever experienced, not just a tremor, but a deep, guttural roar that seemed to emanate from the very core of the earth. The house, my sanctuary, my history, my everything, had imploded. The scent of lemon polish and old paper, the comforting weight of worn spines in my hands, the quiet hum of my life, all had been obliterated in an instant. Then the crushing darkness, the splintering of wood, the sickening crunch of concrete, and Leo's frantic shrieks, a counterpoint to the groaning of tortured structures. How bad is it?" I asked, the question hanging heavy in the air. "Doctor—" Ramirez hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "The seismic event was unprecedented, Alara. It's affected a wide area. Your neighborhood. It's devastated. We're still assessing the full extent of the damage, and the number of casualties is significant." Her voice softened. "But we're here. We're pulling people out. We're taking care of them." She continued her examination, her touch surprisingly gentle on my bruised and battered body. The pain was a constant thrum, a reminder of the life that had been so brutally interrupted. But with each gentle touch, with each soft word, a fragile tendril of hope began to unfurl within me. Leo's voice, once a desperate cry, was now a soft murmur, a comforting presence. He shifted on his perch, and I felt a vibration through the cot. "Ilara?" A new voice, this one rougher, more urgent, cut through the low hum of the triage center. A man in a dusty, once-white uniform pushed aside the flap of the tent. His eyes, weary but sharp, scanned the rows of cots until they landed on me. "Ilara Vance?" I managed another nod. He approached quickly, a clipboard in hand. "I'm Sergeant Miller, with the search and rescue team that found you." He glanced at Leo, then back at me. "Your Parrot. He's quite a hero. We heard him for hours, kept us going." "He saved me," I whispered, my gaze fixed on Leo, who cocked his head, as if understanding the praise. Sergeant Miller offered a tired smile. "He certainly did his part." "We've got a lot of ground to cover, a lot of people to find. But we're not stopping. Not until we've done everything we can." He consulted his clipboard. "You're stable, but you'll need more comprehensive care. We're setting up a temporary transfer to a more established facility. It's going to be a bit of a journey." A journey. The word felt alien, surreal. My world had shrunk to the confines of a cot, the scent of antiseptic and dust, and the reassuring presence of a small gray bird. Leaving this makeshift sanctuary felt like stepping back into the unknown, into a world irrevocably altered. What about my home?" I asked, the question a desperate, futile plea. Sergeant Miller's expression softened with a profound empathy. "Ilara, what's left of it? It's not safe. It's all been rearranged. We'll do our best to secure any personal belongings, but right now, your safety is the priority." He gestured towards the tent flap. "We have a transport ready. Are you able to move?" Moving. The thought sent a fresh wave of agony through my leg. But the thought of staying here, of simply existing in this temporary space, felt worse. I had to move. I had to find out what remained, what was lost, and who else had survived. Leo, as if sensing the shift in atmosphere, ruffled his feathers and let out a soft, familiar chirp. It wasn't a call for help, but a question, an invitation. "I can," I said, my voice gaining a sliver of strength. "With some help." 2 more rescuers appeared, their faces grim but determined. They gently helped me to sit up, their hands steady as they supported my weight. The pain flared, sharp and searing, but I gritted my teeth, focusing on Leo, on the steady rhythm of his breathing. He watched them, his intelligent eyes tracking their movements, his head tilted in that characteristic way. As they carefully maneuvered me onto a stretcher, Leo hopped onto my shoulder, his claws a light, familiar pressure against my skin. He nestled against my neck, a warm, feathered weight, and I felt a surge of something akin to fierce pride. He was my anchor, my witness, my feathered miracle. The journey out of the tent was a disorienting blur of harsh sunlight and the cacophony of emergency vehicles. The air, I noticed, was still thick with dust, but the sky, a brilliant, almost mocking blue, was clear. Structures lay in jagged heaps, their familiar forms twisted into grotesque sculptures of ruin. The neighborhood I had known, the quiet street lined with mature trees, the cheerful flower beds, the houses that held generations of memories, all of it was a wasteland. The scale of the destruction was staggering, a brutal testament to the Earth's raw power. We were loaded into an ambulance, the stretcher secured with practiced efficiency. Leo remained perched on my shoulder, his presence a small, unwavering point of familiarity in this landscape of devastation. As the ambulance doors closed, sealing us in a bubble of white light and hushed urgency, I looked back at the triage tent, a beacon of organized chaos amidst the wreckage. Then, the ambulance lurched forward, carrying us away from the immediate aftermath, towards a future that was as uncertain and fractured as the world outside. The journey had begun, not just the physical one, but the journey of rebuilding, of remembering, of finding my place in this violently rearranged existence. And through it all, the soft, steady presence of my Parrot, my unlikely rescuer, was a constant reminder that even in the deepest darkness, a voice can still be heard, a connection can still endure. He was my echo of survival. And I, his. The sterile scent of antiseptic, sharp and unforgiving, was a stark contrast to the earthy, pulverized concrete that had been my world. My body, a landscape of aches and searing pains, protested every minuscule shift. But even through the haze of medication and exhaustion, Leo's presence was a constant, a warm weight against my chest, his beak occasionally nudging my chin in a gesture that was both familiar and profoundly comforting. He was a feathered anchor in the turbulent sea of my new reality. The triage center was a cacophony of groans, hushed, urgent conversations, and the relentless thrumming of generators. Nurses, their faces etched with a weariness that mirrored the devastation outside, moved with a practiced, almost frantic efficiency. They'd stabilized my leg, a brutal testament to the crushing weight, and administered pain relief that dulled the sharp edges of my suffering, but couldn't erase the phantom sensation of being buried alive. "Ilara, can you hear me?" A voice, soft and kind, cut through the din. A woman in blue scrubs knelt beside my cot, her eyes a gentle, concerned blue. "I'm Dr. Anya Sharma. We're going to move you to a proper hospital now. You're very lucky." Lucky. The word felt hollow, a fragile shell of what it should have been. Lucky to be alive, yes. Lucky that Leo had been with me, his frantic cries a beacon in the suffocating darkness. But lucky? My home, a repository of a lifetime of memories, my books, my sanctuary, had been reduced to an indistinguishable heap of rubble. The world I knew had been violently rearranged, leaving me adrift in its wreckage. The transfer was a blur of hushed voices, the gentle rocking of a stretcher, and the unnerving sight of destroyed neighborhoods flashing past the ambulance windows. Each crumpled building, each uprooted tree, was a fresh stab of grief. This was more than just a disaster. It was an erasure. The hospital was a different kind of chaos. overflowing, strained, but with an underlying order that felt like a lifeline. I was admitted, my broken tibia a focal point for a parade of doctors and nurses. They spoke in hushed tones about compound fractures, surgical interventions, and long recovery periods. Through it all, Leo remained my constant. He perched on my bedside table, occasionally preening his feathers with an almost defiant normalcy, or nestled against my chest, his soft chirps a counterpoint to the beeps and whirs of medical equipment. He was a splash of vibrant life in a world that felt muted and gray. Days bled into one another, marked by the rhythm of medications, physical therapy sessions that pushed my battered body to its limits, and the quiet, persistent presence of my parrot. The news reports, when I could bear to listen, painted a grim picture of the city's fate. Entire blocks leveled, thousands displaced, the death toll climbing with agonizing slowness. The cause, they said, was a seismic event of unprecedented magnitude, a geological anomaly that had ripped through the earth with a guttural roar, but the why felt less important than the what now. One afternoon, a young man with kind eyes and a hesitant smile entered my room. He introduced himself as Sergeant Miller, one of the rescuers. He held a small, tattered plastic bag. Inside, carefully wrapped in a clean cloth, were a few of my salvaged belongings. A chipped ceramic mug, a tarnished silver locket, and a small, leather-bound journal. "We managed to find these when we were clearing your house, ma'am," he said, his voice hushed with a reverence that surprised me. "It wasn't much, but we thought you might want them." My hands trembled as I reached for the journal. The worn leather, the familiar scent of old paper, it was a tangible link to the life I'd lost. I opened it to a random page. My own handwriting, neat and precise, stared back at me. It was a record of thoughts, observations, a quiet chronicle of my days. Tears welled, blurring the words. Leo, sensing my distress, ruffled his feathers and let out a soft, inquiring squawk. He hopped from the table to my shoulder, his claws gently gripping my hospital gown. He nudged my cheek with his beak, a silent, feathered comfort. "It's okay, Leo," I whispered, stroking his smooth gray head. "It's just a lot." Sergeant Miller watched us, a small, sad smile on his face. "Your parrot, he was something else. Kept us going, that bird. Kept us focused." He paused, a flicker of something akin to awe in his eyes. That screaming, it was like nothing I've ever heard. But it was also a marker, a point of light in all that darkness. He recounted the painstaking search, the agonizing hours spent sifting through the debris. "We heard him first," he'd said, his voice barely above a whisper. A desperate sound. Then when we got closer, it was your name, over and over. "Ilara! Ilara!" It was chilling, but it gave us a direction. It told us someone was there, fighting. And we knew we had to find you. He described the delicate process of extrication, the careful removal of concrete and twisted metal, the constant fear of further collapse. "We kept talking to him too," he admitted. "Our team leader, Captain Davies, he'd call out, 'We're here! We're coming, Ilara!' And your parrot would answer. It was like a dialogue, a desperate primal conversation for survival." As he spoke, a wave of profound gratitude washed over me, eclipsing the pain and the grief. Leo. My garrulous, opinionated, feathered friend. He hadn't just been a companion. He had been my voice, my testament to life, when I had none. His frantic shrieks, born of pure terror, had morphed into a beacon of hope, a desperate plea that had pierced the tomb of Rubble and echoed into the ears of my rescuers. The following weeks were a slow, arduous climb, back to some semblance of normalcy. Physical therapy became my daily battle, each movement a victory, each ache a reminder of my resilience. Leo remained my shadow, his constant chatter a soothing balm to my frayed nerves. He'd learned new phrases from the hospital staff, mimicking the gentle good morning of the nurses and the gruff, how are we feeling, of the doctors. But his favorite phrase, the one he'd repeat with a fierce intensity, was still my name. Ilara, Ilara. I began to understand the true depth of our bond. He hadn't just been a pet. He had been my witness. He had seen me swallowed by the earth, and he had refused to let me be forgotten. His voice, raw and primal, had been my lifeline. A desperate call to arms that had not gone unanswered. The cause of the cataclysm remained a mystery, a gaping void in our understanding of the world. There were theories, whispers of geological shifts deep beneath the Earth's crust, a sudden, violent awakening of forces we barely comprehended. But for me, the focus had narrowed. It was no longer about the why of the disaster, but the how of my survival. And the answer, undeniably, lay with my parrot. As I learned to walk again, leaning on crutches, Leo perched on my shoulder, his wing a gentle pressure against my cheek. The city around me was a patchwork of destruction and nascent rebuilding. Skeletal remains of buildings stood as stark monuments to what had been, while temporary shelters and makeshift markets began to sprout like hardy weeds. The scent of dust still lingered in the air, a constant reminder of the earth's fury. I had lost my home, my possessions, my sense of security. But I had also found something profound. I had found the strength within myself, a resilience I hadn't known I possessed. And I had discovered the extraordinary power of an unwavering bond, the primal instinct to protect and to be heard. One evening, sitting on a park bench that had miraculously survived the upheaval, watching the bruised, tired sun dip below the jagged skyline, Leo squawked, "Ilara! Ilara! Come on, Ilara!" I smiled, a genuine, heartfelt smile that reached my eyes. "I'm here, Leo," I whispered, stroking his head. "I'm right here." The world had been shattered, but we had been pieced back together, a woman and her parrot, bound by shared trauma and an unbreakable love. The future stretched before us, uncertain and daunting, but we would face it together, one day, one squawk, one whispered name at a time. The echo of his desperate cries in the darkness had led us to this moment, a testament to the enduring power of a voice, no matter how small, that refuses to be silenced. The world outside the triage tent was a canvas of chaos, a brutal masterpiece painted in shades of dust and despair. I was a fragile brushstroke, still clinging to the canvas, my existence defined by the sharp, unyielding edges of broken concrete and twisted rebar. Leo, my feathered anchor, was pressed against my chest, his tiny claws a comforting pressure on my torn shirt. His frantic chirps had subsided into a soft, rhythmic cooing, a sound that vibrated through me like a fragile pulse. The rescuers, their faces etched with a grim determination that warred with the relief of finding me alive, had worked with a focused intensity. Their voices, once a distant murmur, now surrounded me, a symphony of calm authority amidst the wreckage. "Easy now, ma'am. We've got you. Just a little further. Almost there." Each word was a gentle prod, coaxing me from the suffocating darkness that had been my world for what felt like an eternity. They had managed to free my leg, a process that had been a brutal ballet of pain and controlled force. I remembered the sickening crunch, the searing agony that had threatened to steal my consciousness. But Leo's insistent calls had been a potent anesthetic, a constant reminder that I was not alone. Now, as they carefully maneuvered me onto a stretcher, his small body trembled against mine, a tiny earthquake of shared trauma. The air, once thick with the acrid tang of pulverized concrete, and something metallic and alien, now carried the faint yet unmistakable scent of damp earth and something vaguely floral. It was a stark contrast to the suffocating dust that had been my constant companion. As they lifted me, the world tilted and swam. The oppressive weight that had pinned me down was replaced by a different kind of pressure, the firm, steady grip of human hands. Then, the light. It wasn't the gentle, diffused glow of my study, but a harsh, unfiltered assault on eyes that had become accustomed to an absolute darkness. I blinked, squinting against the sudden brilliance, and the world resolved itself into a tableau of devastation. My street, once a familiar, comforting stretch of suburban normalcy, was unrecognizable. Houses were not just damaged, they were obliterated. Streets were choked with debris, and the sky, a vast, indifferent blue, seemed to mock the ruin below. A wave of nausea washed over me, not from the physical exertion, but from the sheer, overwhelming scale of the destruction. This wasn't just my house. It was an entire community ripped apart. The familiar rhythm of my life, the quiet hum of the neighborhood, the distant laughter of children, had been silenced, replaced by a guttural roar of a different kind of devastation. Where am I? I managed to croak, my voice a raw whisper. A woman in a khaki uniform, her face smudged with dirt but her eyes kind, knelt beside me. "You're in what used to be Maple Street, ma'am. We're taking you to the triage center." She spoke with a practiced calm, her words a balm on my fractured nerves. "Your Parrot is safe. He's with you." I tightened my grip on Leo, burying my face in his soft, gray feathers. He nudged my cheek with his beak, a familiar gesture that sent a fresh wave of emotion through me. He was here. He was alive. In the face of such widespread ruin, his survival felt like a miracle, a testament to the resilience of even the smallest of lives. The journey to the triage center was a blur of movement and hushed voices. I saw more devastation, more shattered lives. Ambulances, their sirens a mournful wail, weaved through the debris-strewn streets. People, their faces a mixture of shock and disbelief, wandered aimlessly, their eyes scanning the wreckage for familiar landmarks, for any sign of what had been. At the triage center, the organized chaos was a stark contrast to the silent horror of the rubble. Tents had been erected, forming a makeshift medical facility. Doctors and nurses, their movements swift and efficient, tended to the injured. The air buzzed with a low thrum of activity, a counterpoint to the distant sounds of rescue efforts still underway. They checked my vitals, cleaned and bandaged my wounds. The pain was a dull throb now, a constant reminder of my ordeal. But it was manageable. My focus was on Leo, who perched on my shoulder, his bright, intelligent eyes taking in the strange, new world. He occasionally let out a soft, questioning, "Ilara?" that sent a pang through my heart. He was still processing, still trying to make sense of the sudden shift from the quiet sanctuary of my study to this bustling, disorienting scene. As they prepared to move me to a more stable medical facility, a man in a uniform approached. He was grim-faced, his eyes carrying the weight of the disaster. "Ma'am," he began, his voice low, "we've been surveying the area. It's bad. The entire block, most of the neighborhood, it's gone. We're still trying to get a handle on the full extent of it." I nodded, my gaze sweeping across the panorama of destruction. There were no familiar rooftops, no recognizable landmarks. My home, my books, my life's quiet tapestry had been reduced to dust and memory. A profound sadness settled over me, a heavy cloak of loss. But beneath it, a flicker of something else persisted. Gratitude.